Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Peter Gibson. I'm the Member of Parliament for Darlington, and I'm the Chair of the APPG on Social Integration. Today's event is a jointly hosted event between the APPG on Social Integration and the APPG on Migration. I'll be hosting the event today. Sadly, the Chair of the APPG on Migration, David Simmons, was not able to join us. We are joined with a panel today. Jill Rutter, if you can give us a wave, Jill, is from British Future, who is the organisation that provides the secretariat to the APPG on Social Integration. We also have Tashi Tahir, who's the Parliamentary Officer for We Belong, a youth-led organisation. And we also have Alberto Costa MP, who is the Chair of the Citizenship Inquiry Committee. We will be hearing from Alberto shortly. So today's event, held between the two APPGs with the support of the RAMP project and British Future as the respective secretariats. The focus for us today is overcoming barriers to Britishness. How can citizenship reform help build a better integrated Britain? We will be hearing recommendations from Alberto's inquiry, which examined the barriers that prevent more people living in the UK from becoming British. Our speakers will discuss these barriers as well as the recommended policy changes. As the inquiry's report Barriers to Britishness notes, parliamentarians can play an important role in engaging the Home Office on this agenda and promoting citizenship at a constituency and community level. This event will also focus particular attention on the concrete actions parliamentarians and officials at the Home Office can take towards ensuring that these barriers to acquiring citizenship are overcome. So I'm going to give you all some key questions to consider. If you would like to raise questions after we've heard from our panellists, if you could indicate in the chat, that would be great. The chat is also going to have some documents posted in there with links for you to take away if you need them. So these are the key questions. So why does citizenship matter? What do we mean by integration? What reforms would get broad public and political consent? How can we increase the salience of this topic to bring about change? What can we do in Parliament to raise the profile of reform, either civic or political? And what can we as MPs, mayors, local authorities and non-governmental organisations do, as well as pressing the government to act? So I'll leave those thoughts with you, and without any further ado, if I can hand Alberto for a 5-minute introduction, please, to his inquiry.
Well, good afternoon, Peter, and good afternoon to all participants in this important and interesting roundtable discussion that we're about to have. This is a subject which is very close to my heart and has been for the very simple fact that I am the son of immigrants. And my parents have never acquired British identity in terms of legal status. They remain Italian citizens, and they've been in this country broadly since the mid-1960s. For me, the whole issue of citizenship is so important because we need to distinguish it from immigration. Often when we talk about anything to do with individuals that make Britain their home, the first word that pops into mind is immigrant or immigration. We've been hearing debates on the Queen's speech about immigration. We hear the government having a new firm, fair plan for immigration. And that's all about how people come into the United Kingdom, the process by which they're permitted to come into the United Kingdom. We've had a major change, of course, with our exiting from the European Union and the ending of free movement of people. But what we're here today to discuss is citizenship, which I think is distinct, albeit related to immigration. Because the question about citizenship is, what do we do with those individuals, like my parents, who make Britain their home lawfully and who are in our country lawfully? What do we do over the period of time that they choose to make Britain their home? And it seems to me that successive Conservative and Labour governments have failed to address this important issue, preferring to concentrate on immigration and the related issues of that field. And I think the time has come for us to carefully look at citizenship. And for us to look at citizenship, we firstly need to identify what we mean by citizenship. And the report that British Future commissioned under Sundar Katwala's directorship and Jill Rutter's principal role in bringing the panel together, it looked firstly at what we mean by citizenship. Is citizenship simply a legal term? And if so, how does one acquire that legal position? Does one acquire responsibilities as well as rights? I would argue, for example, that citizenship, you acquire broadly rights, the right to vote, for example, in many instances, if you're from out with a Commonwealth country. But I think also you acquire the responsibility, so not just a right, but the responsibility, in fact, to partake in our society's activities. And there can be no greater important role than, I think, your moral duty to exercise your franchise to vote. But you can only do that if you have the right to vote in the first place. So what do we mean by citizenship? I think is the first question that we need to look at. The next question is, what is the eligibility? What's the criteria by which people are able to acquire that citizenship that we've defined? Is the process by which you acquire that citizenship easy, or is it difficult? Are there barriers in that process? And I would argue that there are barriers in that process that hinder and place obstacles before those who have a legitimate interest to naturalise and become British. And the report looks into not just these matters, but goes on to look at the other issues related with citizenship. Everything from the life in the UK test and whether that's appropriate in the early to mid 21st century. Looking at also vulnerable groups of people. Are there particular groupings of immigrants that have made Britain their home that we should be identifying in terms of placing exemptions, for example, for fee waivers for the path to citizenship, right through to how we look after those that call themselves British but have a different category of citizenships who live broadly overseas. And also, is the process of acquiring citizenship a positive experience? I think that often we hear of the sort of dingy council municipal office, and forgive me if there are any councillors on participating this afternoon, but I often think that these ceremonies are held in pretty dark, uninviting and uninspiring places. And the ceremony itself, is there an argument that we should be far more welcoming, even to the very end, the ceremony that we have in terms of how we admit people into British citizenship? So the report that British Future commissioned, entitled Barriers to Britishness, is a thorough, detailed report which covers extensively these matters, and which I'm happy to say that the government minister in charge of this area, Kevin Foster, has looked at carefully, and with whom I've had a number of discussions, and I will be taking those discussions forward in the weeks and months ahead, not just myself, but with other colleagues, and I hope Peter will join me in that as well. But I notice in the participation on this afternoon's group, we've got a whole range of other bodies that I've certainly enormously valued their contribution. We've got people like Luke Piper from 3 Million, whose advice and guidance I found invaluable. So I'm delighted to be part of this roundtable this afternoon. I look very much forward to listening and learning from other panel members, as well as all the other participants who have come with their own interests and views in this important subject. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Alberto. And could I move on to Jill now for an introduction into details of the inquiry and a discussion about policy, please?
Thank you very much, Peter. In the 50 years since the Home Office kept very detailed records on citizenship, nearly 4.8 million people have become British. A few were born in the UK, but the vast majority of these new citizens came to Britain to work, to study, for love, to join family, or to seek safety as refugees. The Citizenship Inquiry, which Alberto chaired, which comprised a cross-party group of MPs and others from civil society, from the law, from journalism, sees citizenship very much as integral to the process of integration. Citizenship enshrines a set of responsibilities and rights that enable people to take a full part, play a full part in life in this country. It gives you the right of abode. It gives you the right to vote in general elections and to stand for public office. And it was great to see in last week's elections candidates who have become naturalised as British citizens standing. Citizenship also gives you full access to social benefits in this country, enabling you to play a full part in British life. So in that way, citizenship is integral to integration. But it's also a social bond, a glue. It highlights our shared values, our shared identities that we have in common. And the inquiry took the position that this is important at a time when society is more individualised, more fragmented, when the institutions that previously drew us together have lost some of their hold, and where we see much increased mobility, internal mobility and mobility caused by international migration. So common bonds are important. The process of applying for citizenship also can incentivise integration. The UK, like most OECD countries, requires that you pass a language test and show that you have knowledge about life in this country, civic knowledge, before you become a citizen. So those are the ways that citizenship is related to integration. It's also something that the public support. We did some polling at British Future. 67% of people agreed that if somebody decides to live in the UK long term, it's a good thing that they have the opportunity to become British. There is a strong public preference for people to settle down, to become integrated, to become part of their communities and become British citizens over temporary forms of migration, guest worker schemes. But the inquiry concluded that these benefits of becoming British in terms of integration aren't being realised for three reasons. First of all, as Alberto has mentioned, there are substantial barriers that stop people who are otherwise entitled to citizenship from becoming British. Principally, it's high cost. You can become a citizen of Australia, Canada, the USA, and France, and still have change in your pocket for the price of becoming British. Becoming British is the most expensive citizenship option of any developed country. It's also complicated. Most people require a lawyer, and that pushes up the price. The inquiry recommended a review of fee policy because it costs far more than to become British than it costs the Home Office to administer an application. So a review of fee policy, that citizenship by registration should be free. and that would reduce the price for children. And the inquiry also recommended that children born in the UK should be automatically British, as they were before 1982. Another thing that the inquiry looked at was the life in the UK test and language requirements. Obviously, fluency in English is foundational to the two-way process of integration. And the inquiry supported keeping the language requirements at the same level as they are. But it noted that a lot of newcomers really struggle to find language classes and conversation clubs that people need to become fluent in English. And we really do need to address that issue. This government promised an ESOL strategy, an English language strategy for England in 2018. That still hasn't materialised. So we need to look at access to language classes. There's lots of criticism of the format and the content of the Life in the UK test. It's a multiple choice test and it requires you to swat up on from a handbook. The handbook and the test include lots of trivia, which most British citizens wouldn't think that applicants need to know to play a part in life in this country. There's lots of omissions from the handbook and the test. For example, Northern Ireland's recent history. And what the inquiry found was that there is support for the principle of the test, but not its content and format. And a recommendation was that the government set up an independent review of the test and the language requirements undertaken by an advisory body that includes new and old British citizens. It also recommended piloting a course where applicants for citizenship would study alongside British sixth formers. The courses could be organised in schools, in colleges, by charities. And that there would be a short test at the end of the course. The Norwegians have such a system whereby sixth formers and aspiring citizens study together. And we argued that the kind of knowledge that migrants need to show is very similar than one would expect from a sixth former. So recommendations about the content and the format of the test. And lastly, the inquiry made recommendations about citizenship ceremonies. The potential of ceremonies to show our common bond of citizenship isn't realised because many citizenship ceremonies are hidden away in the dark corners of registry offices. We recommended that council should hold ceremonies at iconic locations and involve local people in welcoming newcomers to their community. In Peter's constituency, they did that. A primary school, Corporation Road Primary School, students at that school made a really attractive booklet welcoming people to Darlington, telling new citizens about the history of Darlington. And the children trooped over to the registry office and welcomed the latest batch of new citizens, gave them their booklets, and they sung the national anthem together. And that was in the media. More initiatives like that. And the inquiry also recommended an annual high-profile ceremony where citizenship is awarded to people who'd been outstandingly brave or made an outstanding contribution to life in the UK as individuals or as representatives of a certain group: nurses, doctors, key workers. So those recommendations are on ceremonies. The inquiry felt that there is a consensus, a cross-party consensus for change. And I wanted just to conclude by saying that there are opportunities to do that, to get citizenship on the agenda through legislation which is going through Parliament, but also by encouraging a debate about citizenship and its importance in civil society. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Much appreciated. Could I just remind everyone that if you are wanting to raise a question or a point, if you can post that in the chat. And I'm going to go to Tashi now for an introduction from her with some lived experiences of people from her organisation, We Belong. Thank you, Tashi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to contribute to this important discussion, and just congratulations on the brilliant report that really includes sensible reforms and, above all, a positive vision for citizenship. So I'm the Parliamentary Officer for We Belong, which is a charity set up by young people like myself who came to the UK as children, who would honestly love to be British citizens one day, but are prevented from doing so because of some of the barriers that Jill has mentioned. And predominantly in We Belong's case, because of the long route to settlement they are on. So they are on a 10-year route, which is costly and complex and really prevents them from fully participating in society. So we really do welcome these recommendations, especially the ones that ask for a review of eligibility and routes to British citizenship, as that has been one of our main campaigns, as well as the reduction of fees for citizenship. These policies, if enacted, would make a huge difference to young lives. And that's where I'll contribute from the experience of young people and children that we worked with. So Alberto started this discussion from differentiating between citizenship from immigration. I think that's important to do, to think about them separately, but also as intervening, because we are really at the crux of it talking about not people who are migrating here, but who are already here and accepted by the Home Office as residents. And I'd start off with sharing my thoughts as someone who is on this route to citizenship and what journey has been like for me. Hopefully, when I require citizenship one day, the impact that that would have for me. So in my case, I came to the UK when I was 7 years old, and my mum and I were fleeing persecution, and we applied for asylum in Glasgow. I guess one of my first experiences was feeling very isolated. I struggled with the language, especially with like Glaswegian accents. And like, instead of being social and talking to people to learn English, I holed myself up at home and watched a series of Disney channels and American sitcoms, which is probably why I still have a slight American twang to my accent. And after a decade of processing our asylum claim, we were granted a form of leave called leave to remain and put on this 10-year route, a long and costly route, which involves multiple applications costing a total of more than £12,000 for each individual over a decade. And due to being on this route, I will be 30 years old when I'm able to apply for citizenship, even though I came here when I was 7. And in my case, all my younger memories have been British. I was educated here, brought up here, on the values of freedom and democracy. Yet I felt really isolated from my British friends simply because I didn't hold a UK passport. And hopefully when I do get to the end of this long journey and make that application for citizenship, I know that it will alleviate some of those anxieties. And above all, what it will really do is provide me with security that I can remain a citizen of the country that I have called home since the age of 7, that there will be no more threat of having my status revoked or being deported to a country that I have never considered home. And there are thousands of young people who contact We Belong who have stories like mine, through no fault of their own, are suffering, who feel British and aren't as aware that they don't have the same rights as British citizenship because they've grown up to who they've grown up with and gone to school. You know, there's simple situations where they can't go to a school trip to France because they don't have the right visa to come in. And the Greater London Authority have done recent estimates that there are approximately 330,000 young people and children, and half of them are born in the UK who have every right to citizenship. but are prevented from obtaining it because of this high cost that Jill mentioned with citizenship, as well as a general lack of awareness among the community, because the rules are so complicated that prevent parents from registering their children. And this has real consequences for the child if they are not registered before they turn 18. They can sometimes lose their right to British citizenship. And sometimes, in cases, even be at threat of deportation, even if they haven't ever set foot in the country of their nationality. At We Belong, we help young people tell these stories to MPs and policymakers to advocate for changes like the British Future Report asks for. And we recently participated in an investigative panorama documentary called I Am British that explains some of the barriers that young people face. And I would highly recommend it to those interested in these issues to give it a watch, send it to your member of parliament, as well as the report, so we can gather momentum behind this case. We have received, positive response from the Home Office on this, on the documentary, where they say they have accepted that young people, through no fault of their own, find themselves in this situation, and they're working to see how they can resolve it. And we just need to really continue to push these stories. There's opportunities to do so there when the Sovereign Border Bill comes to Parliament, to bring amendments and push forward these proposals in front of ministers.
Thank you, Tashi, for your insight from people affected by this. We have had some people indicate that they would like to raise points. Some people have already raised a couple. So first of all, can I go to Sugra? Is that how I say it? Sugra? Hi, Sugra. You've raised a couple of points, and I just wanted to follow on from that. No, sorry, it's in the next point. Over to you, Sugra. Sorry, you're on mute. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Jill. I don't know if you remember coming to Sheffield to speak to my students, but thank you very much. All of the things that you've now highlighted in the report and the synopsis, thank you very much. They were all of our concerns and still remain so. And one of my key concerns is that over the last year, since the pandemic, I've got some students who had obviously the centres, my centre has certainly been closed. I've tried to support students via online mechanisms, but it's just not been easy. It's been so difficult because I have to use various teaching methodologies for my students to go through the Life in the UK handbook. Of course, when you're preparing people for the B1 or A2 speaking tests, they need face-to-face group work, participation, so my concerns are, have you got any power to bring it to the government to say, look, people are in, yes, absolutely limbo, and they would like to gain their citizenship, but the pandemic has obviously put a stop to many of their learning aims.
I think that's one for Alberto to kick off with a response on.
Well, thank you, Sugra, for that issue. And look, Peter and I and other parliamentarians have been extraordinarily busy over the course of this last year. It won't surprise you to learn that there are many public sector bodies who have not been able to perform to the standards which they have set themselves, whether it's the DVLA, whether it's the Borders Agency, or whoever else it might be. Now, we're talking about citizenship today, so of course the question that you ask relates to, well, what about those individuals that have taken the steps to acquire citizenship and through no fault of their own find themselves delayed in progressing their citizenship because the public bodies responsible are themselves not able to progress matters? I think certainly when, as an MP, if I get an individual raising a point like that with me, we do have MP hotlines in a lot of the public sector organisations, which allow us to expedite or remove the obstacle in many instances that a constituent faces. But I must confess, Sugra, out of my constituency, I've not had anyone that's come to me with that specific issue. And so I can only raise that particular issue if people bring it to my attention, and you're the first person that's brought this specific issue to my attention. So I don't think it's through fault of maybe MPs not addressing the matter with ministers. If constituents don't raise, by the way, to be a constituent, you don't need to be a British citizen. As you know, you don't need to be on the electoral roll. If you're resident, indeed, even if you're unlawfully present in the country, you're entitled to representation in our system. But the point is that nobody's raised this with me, and therefore I've not had any experience of tackling this issue because nobody's come to me. So you're the first person that's raised it with me. I don't know whether Peter's had any situation as an MP on that particular issue, but if there is a problem, and if it's not just a bit of anecdotal evidence, if it's a substantial issue there, I'd be happy to take this up with the relevant government minister.
Just to echo Alberto's point, I haven't had anyone raise the issue with me as well, and I think from the engagement that I've had with a variety of organisations in my constituency, a number of organisations don't seem to want to necessarily encourage people to come and see their MP, but if they do come and see us, then we can raise it and we can do something about it. So if you have people that are in this situation, I would encourage them to go and see their constituency MP. And as Alberto's pointed out, they don't need to be citizens in order to get that from members of Parliament. So encouraging them to come to us will help to flag and raise that. Just on this particular point, Tashi or Jill, do you have anything to add or say?
I looked at the statistics last night, and there were nearly 30,000 fewer citizenship applications in 2020 compared with 2019. And I think test centres being closed, perhaps people being furloughed, were some of the reasons. I think kind of it's incumbent on organisations that work on migration to keep an eye on the statistics. As things open up, we should expect more applications, but an 18% drop in 2020 compared with 2019. And I think those were the reasons.
Tashi, do you have anything to add?
We haven't had, like Alberto said, haven't had much concern about this issue. Most of our young people raised the cost issue more than anything.
So I think you indicated you wanted to say something further.
No,
sorry, Sugra did. Thanks, Tashi. Sugra indicated you wanted to say something.
Yeah. My other point was that, you know, for some of the people who've been here, obviously legally, for many years, and didn't necessarily think that they, you know, in the future they would need English language to obviously pass the life in the UK test and the speaking test, now are finding it very difficult to learn the kind of like with either some type of like mental health issue or learning difficulty issue that was never diagnosed or assessed, or purely because of their age. So, you know, once again, many of these inequalities are especially women, you know, and I don't know, Jill or Alberto, if this was picked up in the inquiry at all? The exemption.
If I can sort of paraphrase Sugra, and it's an interesting question to ask actually, is there some discretion in those citizenship ceremonies and the tests where somebody has a learning difficulty or a mental health issue that prevents them from being able to pass the English language test? I genuinely don't know the answer myself to that.
It's undiagnosed. There are exemption categories, but they are undiagnosed ones.
Yeah. Alberto, did you indicate you've got an answer there?
Probably Jill will have a clearer answer, but just on the generalities of the language issue, I'm probably far too liberal on this one. I mean, my own family example, my father speaks awful English. He's been here for over, unless he gets angry, then his English improves and he becomes impeccable in speaking English. But so I've always taken a sort of liberal view about, I know probably most of you will think you need to have some form of knowledge of the English language in order to progress. Actually, it hasn't stopped my family progressing, with my father's tendency to revert to speaking constantly in Italian rather than in English. And I remember when I discussed it with Jill and Sunder when we were looking at this issue about language generally, I think I had to accept that my view is perhaps a bit too liberal on the necessity for speaking English. I think it's very easy. The newspapers and the media can get carried away. You must be able to speak English. You must have a certain category, because only by that means can you progress in society. But actually, it didn't hinder my father. So I think you know, I'll probably remain slightly liberal on this one, but I accept the report's finding, and probably Jill's best to give you to tell you about that.
Thanks, Alberto. We have a question there from Grace in the chat, and I just would like to supplement Grace's question with regards to so Grace, where are you? Grace.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi. If you'd like to ask your question, but I wanted to supplement it with a
Please
comment.
go ahead and supplement. Yeah.
Yeah, well, supplement a question really with regards to the arrival of people from Hong Kong as a result of recent developments there. So please fire away.
Yeah, my question was mainly to find out how the citizenship reform was going to help people who came to the UK, their parents came to the UK, and they had the children here, and all of them had the belief that they were British by the fact that they came from Commonwealth countries. And then were caught up in this Windrush scandal, which has now made it very, very difficult for many of them to acquire their status. So they're basically, you know, all hanging in limbo, so to speak. So with all the hoops and barriers that Jill has enumerated, I was wondering how that reform is going to help many of them to acquire their status. And now we're into the compensation phase of the whole Windrush scandal, but I'm more interested in how their status can be regularized, because for me, that tops everything else. So that's what I'm wondering, how the reform is going to help them, you know, overcome that. And these are people who have lived in the UK. So the question of the tenure of the number of years you've been here, I don't think should really count. And also the language and life in UK test also, I don't see how that's going to help. But these are people who have lived here all their lives, and they're being subjected to all these barriers. So that's my question. I want to know how it's going to help.
Thanks, Grace. Alberto, are you aware of any expedited processes for those citizens who fall into that Windrush category?
Yes, I think there are, but I think Jill's probably the best one to answer this. Okay. But I think when we do we do expedite matters with the Home Office if constituents have got a particular issue that's pertinent to them, and we can demonstrate it. It certainly adds to the case submissions that you make with the Home Office. But Jill, maybe you want to answer about the exemptions and the generalities of that, how it applies.
So there is a special Windrush process which grants citizenship without cost for people who came to the UK as British citizens but were affected by changing legislation and the actions of the Home Office. And we understood when we were carrying out the inquiry that the Windrush citizenship process was working well, and are obviously interested in any new evidence from that. And people going through the Windrush process are exempt from the English language and citizenship test, obviously, because they have largely been educated within the UK. They've been resident for many years. There is a similar process for stateless people, although they have to pay to register. but there are processes where you can register as a stateless person for citizenship. As regards exemptions from the language test, you are exempt if you have a disability. You can show you have a disability, including a learning disability. You're exempt if you're over 65, and you're exempt if you come from certain countries, or your education has, your university education has been through the medium of English. So there are exemptions.
Thanks, Jill. Chris, hope that answers your question. I'm just catching up with the chat, and there's a number of indications that I should be coming to Baroness Hamwee for some comment. Is that okay? If I could ask you to give your thoughts at the stage.
Thank you. Well, it's a question, but the first thought is to say to Alberto, you can't be too liberal. That's not possible in this context. And on language, I wonder if other people share my view that there's a chicken and egg here, that you don't become comfortable in a language unless you're given the opportunity to practice it. And that's not just teaching or language, formal classes or clubs. It's actually being part of society and having to use language. My grandmother spoke terrible English. She came from what was then the Ottoman Empire. So I'm kind of aware, you know, that's in my thoughts. But my question to Jill, thank you for the point about the number of applications going down, because that's kind of an alert about the hole in the Home Office budget, which is the way it treats people as a cost centre, is something that worries a lot of us. My particular question to Jill is about public attitudes towards people who are seeking citizenship, rather than on the part of the people who are seeking citizenship. Were you finding any problems there? I wondered if there was anything in your work that you might usefully share with us.
So as part of the inquiry, we asked a polling question, but we also brought groups of citizens by birth and new British citizens together in Southampton and Edinburgh, and asked them about the process of becoming British, about entitlements, about the price of becoming British, and about the test and ceremonies. And we made some short films, which you can see on the British Future website. Generally, among British citizens by birth, as I said, there is very broad public support for citizenship. People prefer it if you settle and become a citizen. They don't like guest worker schemes. There is an assumption that everybody who is born in the UK is automatically a British citizen. People are surprised when they learn that they have to apply to be British. And there's surprise about the costs. We asked people how much it should cost to be a British citizen, and they came up with answers like kind of £1,000 for a family, or children go free. So there is surprise about the cost, and people don't know about the ceremonies, which shows that how hidden away they are. We can send you more information about public attitudes to citizenship after this meeting.
Thanks, Jill. I've got a question from Zoe Gardner.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to the panellists, and thank you also to Jill and British Future for this really helpful report. And we're very glad to see. I work for the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, and we've recently brought out research that looks at insecurity within the immigration system and the barriers to long-term residence, and it echoes many of the same findings and recommendations, including, crucially, automatic citizenship for children born in this country. I wanted to sort of raise a question or a little bit of a concern around some of the things that have been said around sort of fee waivers for certain groups, or separating out certain groups which may benefit from a facilitated process or another. And just a caution that in the findings of my research, which I will share in the chat here, this sort of piecemeal approach of bit by bit policy changing for this group and that group is one of the major factors that's led us to a situation where so many people who are making long-term decisions to live here and to establish their lives here and have no intention of leaving actually remain in an insecure situation for a really long time. So I wanted to ask about how the panel feels about sort of a more holistic approach, that rather than targeting children who may have been the children of people who brought them here at a young age and so on, which I think that we've all seen that there's vast public support for, or other groups to lower the fees in certain piecemeal situations, a holistic approach that would allow migrants to obtain a permanent status much quicker as a whole. And also, I think we've been talking about migrants here with lawful status, and how obviously that people agree that those people should have a pathway to citizenship. But my research has found that the vast majority of people here with unlawful status, 82% in my study, had actually come here with a lawful status, and because of that extremely long road to citizenship that I think Tashi spoke about so eloquently, that 10-year route with the multiple reapplications and fees, have actually lost their status because of that. And so the sort of that distinction between lawful migration and unlawful migration actually is caused by the symptoms of the same problem, and how to address that, including potentially through a route to regularization for long-term undocumented residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any of the panelists want to respond to Zoe's points? Tashi is responding. Tashi?
Yeah, I guess thanks so much, Zoe, for your contribution. We've done a lot of work on this, and when it comes to children, I think it's really important that we do think of them as also part of the family unit. We've seen that it's so easy for them to fall in and out of status because of decisions that their parents have made. Sometimes, you know, when they are on this route to settlement, the parent will apply for their former status because they are the breadwinner, and the children would be left undocumented. So there's often cases where there's families that are full of children and adults that have mixed statuses, where some of them will be eligible for British citizenship and some of them will have no status. And this is an issue that, you know, we have to kind of think about, that affects everyone, not just migrant society. And there's so many talent and ambition that can go to waste if we don't think of this as that holistic approach. And everyone benefits from a society where people who move here and adopt our values and make their homes are able to integrate so they can get on with their lives. And we should have a think of how we can make that process easier of regularization so that they can eventually go on that path to citizenship and acquire it.
Thanks, Tashi. I'm just conscious of time, with only 10 minutes left until the end of the session. We have got still quite a number of questions to get through. So if I could just encourage the panelists to be sort of brief in their responses. Jill, there's a question from Baroness Hamwe to comment about public attitudes of Indigenous Brits, if that is such a thing.
We did that.
Oh, okay. Apologies. What else have we got here? Baroness Lister, is there anything that you would like to add to the discussion? Are you still with us, Baroness Lister? Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry, I am still with you, but I've just been I had someone servicing my alarm system. I've been running up and down stairs. Yeah, I mean, I've really, really interesting contributions from the panel and others. I have 2 points. One is at the very beginning, Peter, I think it was you or Costa, I can't remember now, raise the kind of question, why does citizenship matter? And I think everyone here thinks it does matter, but the government doesn't seem to think it matters, because as you'll be aware, one of the responses to complaints about the cost of citizenship for children who have to register is, well, they can have leave to remain, and that's good enough. So I just wondered, I'd be interested, whether people think that's what the government really believes, or whether it's just a kind of useful argument to try and bat away the arguments around the cost of citizenship. And of course, following the Court of Appeal case, government is now carrying out a Section 55 review of the citizenship fee, registration fee for children who've had to register their citizenship, to see whether it's in the best interest of the child. And I just wondered whether, I mean, that's all gone very quiet, but does the panel think that actually out of that could come a real change in policy, so that we have citizenship fees that do no more than reflect the administrative cost of applying the fees, at least to children?
Can I come to Alberto? Do you have any inside knowledge on the government's view about citizenship and potential reduction in fees, Alberto?
I wouldn't say insight. I mean, I have had direct discussions with the Prime Minister on this issue, particularly when he first took over as Prime Minister. And I've tried wherever possible to raise the matter repeatedly with the Home Secretary and with Kevin Foster. I think it's very, very difficult to budge the government on this. It's never easy asking the government to reduce its fees for a whole host of activities that it performs. The government's response is that it doesn't accept or deny that it charges high fees, but it simply says the monies that it brings in are reinvested in the very people that have applied for citizenship. So that's the government's position. I think insofar as the court case that Ruth's mentioned, I had a chat with the Law Society of Scotland on Monday about this, and I'm just awaiting a briefing myself on where we are with that court case, when it is expected to go through the process and have a judgment. And I do intend to take this up directly with Kevin Foster, the Immigration Minister, on the whole issues. I think, Ruth, you might be right. The government might have its hands forced to take action on this particular issue if the judiciary rule in favour of the applicant.
Well, they have. I mean, they have ruled in. I mean,
sorry, the rule in favour, it's gone to appeal.
Well, no, the government isn't appealing the bit about. There are two parts to the appeal, and the second part is being held in June. But the bit that the government has now said it won't appeal is the judgment that it's not in the best, that they didn't carry out a proper Section 55 best interest of the child.
So I'm awaiting a specific briefing on the question of the timetable of the current judicial proceedings from the Law Society of Scotland. So I have discussed it, and as I say, I'm going to be taking that particular matter forward with Kevin Foster. But in answer once again, Peter, to your question about an insight, I think the government's position is that it listens, it sympathises, but then it just says no. And it all boils down to whether or not there's the arithmetic in the House of Commons that could force the government's hands ultimately on this particular issue.
I mean, and it may be, sorry to come back, but I mean, given that we're going to have a piece of legislation going through that covers some citizenship questions, kind of long-standing injustice done to British overseas territory, overseas territory citizenship, it would provide an opportunity, and perhaps we should be thinking about what we can do on that. But I think you know, I mean, and it goes back to what Sally Hanway said as well in terms of the money, the use of the money, because it's not investing in the people. I mean, it's this conflation, which I think we made right at the outset, this conflation of immigration and citizenship is very unhelpful. There's no reason why people who've lived here all their lives should be subsidizing the immigration process.
Baroness Lister, the passage of legislation through the Parliament is the opportunity to raise some of these issues and table amendments and raise these points in debate. You and I both know, and parliamentarians know, that legislation doesn't arrive fully formed, and it requires a scrutiny and amendment by parliamentarians raising various issues. And if issues come forward and gather enough support, they're either accepted or the government may even indeed change its view and make amendments itself. So we're on that journey, aren't we?
We are indeed. I can see Baroness Hanway is smiling because there's a group of us in the Lords who've been harrying the government for years in every possible piece of legislation to try and get a change on this.
Well, Ruth is our head terrier.
Well, we've got a new House of Commons, and you've got lots of new enthusiastic MPs such as myself. In recent days, we've seen conversion therapy announced in the Queen's speech, which is something that I never thought that we would see announced there, but due to pressure that's been applied, that's certainly coming forward. So I'm very pleased to see that. So all is not lost. I would encourage you to keep up the pressure, keep up doing what you do. I'm very conscious we're down to the last very 2 minutes, and I think rather than continuing on with questions from the chat, which I think would end up taking us over, could I just come back to each of our panelists for a quick sort of 1 minute, well, 35-second summary, really. Can I start with you, Tashi, please?
Yeah. I guess I will just end on when we were talking about next steps and how we can take those forward when we do those amendments in the bill and to meetings with ministers. What has worked so strongly in our campaigns is to put those with lived experience at the front of the campaign, so they are able to explain the real life impact of what these changes and what acquiring British citizenship would mean to them. And they, above all, can tell us the significance of being able to register as British. And I would just advocate for those experience views to be put forward to create this immigration system that should respect with British values, and in doing so ensure that it's fair and humane and respects integration as well.
Thanks, Tashi. Jill, if I can come to you.
I'd argue that as we said in the report, the government needs to set out its aims of citizenship policy. At the moment, there is no clear articulation of aims, and policy is ambivalent and sometimes contradictory. We want to attract and retain the brightest and the best to contribute to our economic life in the UK, for example, but we don't make it easier for them to become a British citizen. So I think new legislation should be an opportunity to debate the aims of citizenship policy.
Thanks, Jill. And last but not least, Alberto, can I come to you? Some rounding up remarks, please.
Indeed, Peter, thank you very much for chairing this afternoon on behalf of the various APPG groups which you're involved in. Sorry, did you hear me there?
Yeah, we can hear you, Alberto. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the work that you've done and that other stakeholders have done in this field. Thank you for the work the British Future have done. Look, I think we're all broadly agreed on what we would all like to see. We would like to see fairer fees. We would like to see a better test. We would like to see the criteria for becoming a British citizen much more fairer in the approach. And we would ultimately, the whole umbrella over all this is the word welcoming. We want to welcome people that have made the United Kingdom their home and give them that opportunity to make the final jump to citizenship. So I think welcoming individuals that have made Britain their home to citizenship is the sort of overall buzzword that I would use. And all of us have got a task to do. Peter and I, as members of the legislature, have got a task in the House of Commons, but actually all of you can lobby government directly through your MPs. The more pressure that the government has applied to it in terms of this issue, the greater the likelihood is that submissions that Peter and I and other parliamentarians make will be listened to. So actually we can do this together, and I do think positively that we'll be able to make some inroads on the issues that this excellent report, Barriers to Britishness, produced from British Future. So thank you again for all participants, and thank you, Peter, for chairing this excellent roundtable this afternoon.
Thank you, Alberto. So in summary, thank you everybody for joining us today. I do appreciate your contributions, participation. The chat has a number of links in it to a variety of documents and publications from the various APPGs. And I thank you once again.
Thank you.